Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark, and this is part 3 of a video series for the Astro Journey quilt pattern. In the previous episode, I completed the 6 double sawtooth star blocks with a pinwheel in the center, and today I'm going to continue on with, you'll notice here, in the quilt pattern on page 5, we have the instructions for making the eccentric stars. So looking at the instructions, we'll be making 16 of these stars, and we have our appendix for instructions related to making the HST squares. But notice that it tells us which fabric pieces we'll be using for this block. And so we have fabric pieces A and O. We'll make 64 HST squares from those. A is our gray 3 1/4 inch squares, and O are the black 3 1/4 inch squares. And then it also tells us that we'll be making, with fabric pieces O and T, 64 more HST squares. We've already mentioned fabric piece O, but T is the white 3 1/4 inch square. And so here are those. So noticing here on the diagram for the eccentric star, it also consists of these rectangular pieces of black fabric. Once we get our HSTs ready, we'll assemble the eccentric star according to the diagram. We'll join all the pieces of fabric, and you'll notice that the way it's going together, because we're using rectangles, is kind of like the upper left quadrant, upper right quadrant, and the lower left and right quadrants. Those pieces go together first, and then we'll sew those into rows, and then the rows together, we'll join those to form the block. You can use the appendix page on HSTs to look at the instructions. One of the first steps it lists there is to mark a diagonal line corner to corner on the lighter fabric. And I've already done that. I already went ahead and counted out 32 pieces of both the white and the gray and marked them with the pencil. And I also have my black 3 1/4 inch squares. And depending on your fabric, and this may not be necessary for you, but this fabric that I have, if you look at the front versus the back, it's not easy to tell the difference because the black fabric has this spatter on it. And so you can kind of see it on the back a little bit, but you definitely can tell the difference if you turn it in the light. So I went ahead and turned all the black ones face up, and I have all the others turned face down because I drew the lines on them. So I did that to make it a little easier to go ahead and go through these to run them through the sewing machine. And so next task at hand is just to go ahead and take all of our white and gray fabric and our black 3 1/4 inch squares and sew on each side of the line, and then we'll be able to cut the HSTs and then do our pressing. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so for all these HSTs for the eccentric star, I've sewn on both sides of the line, 1/4 inch. I'm going to cut all the pieces that are chain pieced apart, and then I'll cut them down the line that's drawn from corner to corner, and then after that I'll press open the seams. So since I'm dealing with 128 HST squares, I'm not going to try to press these open. I think that would just take too long. So I'm going to press them to one side, and usually we press to the darker side. Okay, so we have all of our HSTs sewn and pressed, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim them, as it says on page 5. In step 4, it mentions don't forget to trim the HSTs to 2 1/2 inch squares. And as I mentioned before, if we have a ruler with a 45-degree diagonal line, we can use that to line up on where the two fabrics meet to make sure we're getting a square HST. Okay, so I finished squaring up all of my white and black and gray and black HSTs. And so now the next thing that I'm going to work on is looking at page 5 in our pattern where we're making our eccentric stars. Step 5 tells us to join fabric pieces in with the HSTs as illustrated in figure A4. And so fabric piece in are these rectangles, in my case black. I've arranged them here in the way that the diagram shows we would join the pieces. Of course, since we're joining two HSTs with a rectangle, we'll have to do the HSTs first, right? Because then they'll end up being the same length as the rectangle once we join them. And so what I plan to do is first off go through and join all of my HSTs and get all of those done, and then I can come back and work from joining HSTs to the rectangles. And then once we get through that, then we can join those, form the blocks. So time to get sewing again. For the Eccentric Star, I've sewed together all the HSTs that are kind of in the middle of the block. I'll cut all these apart and then I'll press the seams, and then we can assemble the block. So I was looking at the Eccentric Star and I thought, if I want to do chain piecing on the rectangle with the two HSTs that are sewn together now, I actually took the block, and if you turn the blocks back around to match like what the finished block, the layout of these blocks is going to be like, it's like this. But I noticed that you can take all four of these sets, because we're basically sewing two rectangles together, right? But if we turn them all, rotate them, they all really are sewing together the same way. So my thought to make this simpler to do chain piecing on all these sets of four is to just turn them in one direction and not have to think about what the resulting block is going to look like, because it doesn't matter while I'm doing this chain piecing, and that'll be easier to put these together. I just had to pay attention that my gray fabric is on the right and the white is on the left. As long as I do that consistently, I can just chain piece all these, and then when I sew these together to form the block rows, then it'll be important which way I turn those. So I'm going to go ahead and get started sewing these together. For the Eccentric Star, I have sewn together the rectangle with the two HSTs like this to form the four quadrants of the overall block. Now I'm going to cut these apart that I chain pieced, and then I'll press the seams out. Okay, so I pressed all the four patches, I guess I'll call them, because by the time we get closer to the end of this block, that's what we end up with, these four pieces that need to be sewn or joined together. And so I'll join these in rows, and then we'll join the two rows together to form our entire block. So time to get sewing again. For the Eccentric Star block, I've joined the top and bottom rows. I'm going to cut these apart and press the seams, then we'll join those two rows to form the entire block. Okay, for the Eccentric Star, I just finished pressing the seams on the top and bottom rows. I'm going to join those together to form the entire block. So now it's time to sew some more. So I sewed the top and bottom rows together on my Eccentric Star block. So now I'm going to press out the seams on these after I cut them apart for my chain piecing. And we're getting close to having these Eccentric Star blocks done. I finished 16 of these Eccentric Stars and they're looking good. And in the next video, I'm going to take on the Hunter Star. There are also 16 of those. Those have even more HSTs involved. So I hope you enjoyed this sew along and watching me work on the Eccentric Star. And if you enjoy videos on quilt patterns as well as sew alongs and you haven't subscribed to my channel, I encourage you to do so. Please also leave your comments, give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, and I'm wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.